PSA.
There's caramel.
I can't.
No.
I was also.
Well, I was there. I just want you to know.
How was it?
It was good, and I'm trying to get it promoted on some adjustments.
You guys want me to start or do you want to?
Yeah.
We can kick this up. You're here. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for being here today. We've got a jam-packed agenda here. I'm excited to get into it. But before we do, if we just go around and introduce ourselves. We're affiliated with an organization. The icebreaker today.
Oh, I was hoping you would talk.
The icebreaker, courtesy of Aaron. It's a good one we got for you. The question on the table is, what is your proudest accomplishment before you were 18?
Oh my God.
So I'll start.
It's fun, guys. Don't worry. Sorry for work group 1 participants. You've already done this one. There you go.
So my name is Jack Reaganbogen. I'm an attorney at the Colorado Center on Law and Policy. And before 18, I was actually a competitive chess player, and I had won the national chess championship when I was in kindergarten.
When?
Yeah,
Kindergarten.
I was the national kindergarten chess champion.
Can we get a picture of that?
I do. I had it. Yeah.
You see it across the room.
Just if you Google image me, it still shows up.
Well, I think you should do that, sir, and pass it around.
All right.
That's amazing.
All right, that's my fault.
I'm Anya Rose. I'm a policy analyst with Hunger Free Colorado. I think my biggest accomplishment is similar age. I was Vermont's #1 lollipop cross-country ski racer, and it was the lollipop stage because you didn't actually get awarded. You got everybody, all participants got a lollipop, and that was the end of my athletic career.
All right, hello, my name is Samantha Garduno. I am a outreach specialist with Adams County. My highlight from before I was 18, I guess, when I was in 5th grade, we did like a town, and we had businesses, and I had the top business selling Krispy Kreme donuts.
Oh, that's a good one.
I'm Sarah
That is good.
Lefkowitz, Colorado Center on Law and Policy, and when I was in 3rd grade, I won the award in my school for reading the most books. I'd be a Charlotte's Web.
Oh, nice.
That's why we hired her.
Oh, I don't remember now, just most.
Terry Chaston with CDHS and the SNAP manager for the state of Colorado. I had the lead in my high school musical.
What was the musical?
Which was?
Brigadoon.
Oh, who was the, what's the name of the lead?
Fiona, I think. I don't know.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Samuel Jennings. I'm with BDT Benefits Data Trust. I'm the Colorado Engagement Manager. Wow, accomplishment prior to 18. I did do a study abroad when I was like 11, did like an exchange. I'm originally from Arizona, and we did an exchange to Mexico, which was like kind of cool. So successfully survived a week in Mexico with a bunch of other middle schoolers.
Hi, Sandy Stonemark, University of Colorado. I'll just say my most memorable was my first job at Foster Frosty Foods. I was a phone solicitor and got fired after a month because I had 0 sales. Pushed me into medicine.
My name is Karen Kendrick. I cannot think of anything. Just like getting my license, maybe getting my license. That's not an accomplishment.
Hi, I'm Carla Laracidi, and I'm the Food and Energy Systems Division Director at CDHS. When I was about 15 or 16, I worked on a sanctuary farm that brought in a lot of like really needy animals, and so I started a first aid and CPR class for other volunteers for some of the animals. It was awesome and at times gross.
That is awesome.
My name is Matt Krieger. I work for Denver Human Services, and A few things I'd say I remember is my athletic career peaked out at 12 when we won a state hockey championship. I grew up close to Canada, so hockey. So, that was definitely the peak.
Brett Rader, Director of Client Services for Hunger Free Colorado. When I was 15, I dropped corporate scuba bar, which if you're not a skier, what that means is in Jackson Hole, there's a really famous cliff drop that I don't think I'd do it today. When I was 15, I didn't realize you could get hurt. So.
Letitia Holloway, a community member. One of my most memorable would be graduating a year before my class.
That's great.
And I'm P.E. Powell, and I'm with the Department of Human Services. I came into my own at 35, so I don't really have a lot of great accomplishments from being young. I survived. I have sisters that I help raise because they're younger. That's about it, guys.
That's a big deal.
That's a big deal. Yeah.
Hi, everyone. I'm Erin Ulrich. I'm the implementation director for the blueprints. So I was trying to think of a different one, and I shared it the word. I couldn't because I really only had one success when I was under 18. But we won the state soccer championships my freshman year in high school.
Hi everyone, Alexis Wheatman with the Colorado Health Foundation. My athletic career also peaked early. It was the 8 and under state breaststroke champion.
I'm Alana Flowers. I'm with Benefits in Action, and when I was in the 3rd grade, I won the 3rd grade spelling bee, so that was a good day for 8-year-old me.
My name is Andrew Stricker. I'm with Trailhead Institute, and although not as august as Jack, my freshman year we won the state high school chess championship.
Okay.
Yeah. Nice work room, man. Bring them forward.
Good, I won't be here.
Hi, my name is Leticia. I'm with the Blueprint. I come from a family of 12, so my accomplishment is surviving that. I was the youngest of 12, so I'm alive.
I mean, did you have to survive it? You were the baby.
I was the baby.
You didn't
But I
get
survived
loved
that.
up on.
I developed. I created my own brain at 35. But I did.
Do we have someone new join?
Hi.
One of your proudest or most memorable accomplishments before age 18?
Okay, my proudest moment was being the top of my high school senior class.
Nice.
With a 5.2.
Nice.
It was possible, I guess.
Congratulations. That's amazing.
And on the phone, we have Kayla Frawley.
Hi, this is Kayla Frawley from Clayton and Ray's, Colorado, and I was trying to think of something that like my 17-year-old self would have been proud of, and I used to want to be a car mechanic when I was really young, and so I worked at an oil change, one of my many jobs in high school, and I was really good, and I got my own grease monkey suit with my name on it, and I just thought I was really cool. So that, I think, is a decent accomplishment.
Yeah. And Tijuana?
Hi, I'm Tijuana Bullock. Let's see, I'm from Together, Colorado, here in Grand Junction. And one of my greatest accomplishments around that time, I guess that age, that's been many, many years ago, was I was a part of a group to help start a charter school. And yes, and it actually, I don't know what happened. It took off. But it actually got up and running, and I was excited about that.
And Sam?
This is Sam Lander-Casper with Pickens County Economic Assistance. When I was younger, I used to train horses, and by the time I was 15, I was doing well enough that Buck Brannaman, who's also known as the Horse Whisperer, asked my folks if I could come work for them for a summer. So I went and did that over the summer when I was 15.
Wow, that's
And Brian?
Hi everyone, this is Brian Trujillo with Centura Health. I'm the community health manager. I think before 18, if you know me, I'm 5'5", and when puberty hit, it didn't hit me. So I did a lot of competitive swimming, and there were a couple of times that I could swim faster than those kids that puberty blessed and hit with 6'2". So I guess those are my accomplishments before 18.
All right, and Michael.
Hi, everyone. This is Michael Vonte from the Department of Higher Education. I guess my proudest moment before 18, when I was in high school, I grew up in Florida, and so I was involved in a research project that NASA was actually putting together on putting protein crystals in the space station. And so I was able to go over there, do some of that, and yeah, that's that.
That's funky. And then Heidi.
That's Brenda.
Brenda.
Yeah. Hi, it's Brenda Heimbach with El Paso County Public Health, and by the time I was 18, I could speak 3 languages, Dutch, English, and French, and now not so much. I can pretty much speak English and not so much Dutch and French anymore. I've gone backwards.
And Christy?
Christine.
Christine, sorry.
Hi, I guess you're talking to me. So it's Christine Dolan from Garfield County Public Health, and I don't want to shame you all, but I did make a triple play in kickball when I was 9.
That's awesome.
Anybody else on the phone? All right. So today, thank you for those introductions and for sharing a little bit about yourselves. Today, what we're hoping to do is hear a report back from the small groups who have all met at least once by now, and would like to hear about how those conversations went and whether anyone had expressed interest in serving as a chair or co-chair, and how this work group can be most supportive in facilitating productive meetings moving forward. We also hope to hear from our state partners who graciously offered to attend today and give any updates around some of the proposed rule changes that may be working its way down the pipeline. We're going to hear from Anya about an update to the public charge, which is a proposed change occurring on the federal level. Erin's going to share out about some of the funding proposal updates, and specifically the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation opportunities. And then we'll conclude with some housekeeping and figuring out what makes sense in terms of scheduling for this group moving forward. Does anyone have any questions or any other really pressing items you want to make sure that we all talk about today? Okay, great. So let's hear first from the legislative small group, and I guess I'll ask the co-chairs if they would be willing to report back on how that went.
Sure. So that is myself and Sarah. So we met and discussed the 2 main projects that group was tasked with, 1 being increasing SNAP outreach funding, and 2 being looking at increasing the minimum benefit or the fruit and vegetable allowance for WIC, and the minimum benefit for SNAP, excuse me. So we talked about this legislative session prioritizing SNAP outreach funding. We think that the minimum benefit, increasing the actual benefit amounts will require a little bit more groundwork and research and creating a bit of a groundswell. And we think that we can use the full year before the 2021 legislative session to do that. Anything to add on that?
Well, and also as far as increasing the minimum benefit goes, we're gathering data on what that would cost, what that would look like. Would it be for all people who get the minimum benefit? How many of those people are there? We have data that suggests that more than half of them have a disabled member in the household or are just a disabled member of the household. Would it be more feasible, aimed at increase at that group or all groups that are affected, or just two issues? Got some time to think about it, sounds like.
So we're thinking that the project team will work on that, but sort of as in the background right now, and go full steam ahead on the SNAP outreach proposal. So we don't have to go through this whole thing today, but I did bring a quick draft of what that proposal could look like that I'm hoping to gather as much feedback on as possible in the next week or so. And what we're thinking is increasing general funds towards SNAP outreach, but specifically targeted at outreach to support education. And that could be from early childhood education through higher education, because we know that hunger and food insecurity impact students' ability to learn and really just their ability to show up healthy to class. So we're thinking that that would be in addition to the rural outreach funds that were appropriated last year. So if you skip to the back page, or I guess it's actually the second page, the main recommendation here would be one, to maintain the rural SNAP outreach funding that we received last year, which was for about $400,000 in general funds that leveraged $1 million in actual outreach funding to support application assistance and new partnerships to serve underserved rural and frontier communities. And then in addition, we're suggesting that the state budget should include additional state funds to draw down additional federal match and support SNAP access for educational success. So that could be targeted in a variety of different ways. Some of what we thought of was, school districts with 4-day weeks where children are more likely to have to skip a meal because they're not getting free and reduced price lunch on Friday or whatever day they're not going to school. Or college campuses with high rates of student hunger or student parents. So those are some of the ideas that we're throwing around, but would love to get feedback, especially from folks working in the education space.
Yes, I see Michael Vente's on the phone. We can sure use your input, either to myself or Anya.
There are some highlighted numbers in here, specifically how much we would be asking for, because we have not decided on that. So I put 400,000 in there, but would love to hear reactions and thoughts on what's feasible and what would actually move the needle for that population.
Quick question from Kayla on the phone. Do we have an electronic version that those of us on the phone might be able to access, or did I miss an email? If I did, I'm sorry.
Leticia, would you be able, if I forward it to you, would you be able to send it out?
Yep. Are you on the Zoom or is it Andrew?
Andrew's in the Zoom, so I can do it.
So do you want to email it to Andrew and then pull it up? Can you send it through the chat?
It's a Word document.
It's a Word document.
Can you send an attachment in the chat? Then it goes to everybody who's on.
Can you send that through Zoom?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
I know I sent it to Aaron. I don't know if I sent it to.
Did you change anything this time?
Nope.
Okay, I can send it then. I got it.
Okay. Great question, Kayla.
Sending it now.
Apologies. This was completed more recently than I'd like to admit. So that's coming.
Thank you.
I just had a quick clarifying question. It says here, including federal matching dollars, but is that meant to say not including federal matching dollars?
Well, that's another thing that's up for discussion. So my understanding is that last year the rural funds that were appropriated was about 400,000 in general funds. So that provided 40% of the total investment. 10% was private matching dollars, and then to match that, 50% was the federal match. So it leveraged over $1 million in total SNAP outreach spending, but it was only 400,000 in general funds. Is that correct?
Incorrect.
Okay. Okay.
In part, the strategy there was to demonstrate that the communities who would be receiving funds were also committed to the effort by demonstrating that they secured some of their own match. Does that make sense?
Yes, and that would be, if we could make that happen, that would make this a stronger proposal for that targeted education outreach as well.
We have a funders convening on October 14th for the blueprint. So there's, I think, 50 or 60 different funders who have been invited to that. So that's something we could absolutely bring to that as a specific ask as well.
Is there a ceiling in terms of the federal match where they max out?
Wait, that doesn't fall under a cap?
There's no cap for, not for outreach, there is for ed. We do
Ah,
it across the
okay.
nation, but we've never committed nations through a to actually.
I didn't know that.
Okay.
Well, in any case, we're just referring to general funds here, right?
Yes. Yeah, but that's a great point, that if we could bring in additional private funds, we could still say, you know, 400,000 in state investment, leveraging more like $1 million. Again, sort of like the structure of the rural outreach.
So Anya, do we want to limit to SNAP, or do we want to look more broadly and say that these outreach workers will enroll families in all federal benefits they're eligible? So WIC would be one that, especially in the early childhood, child care tax. I mean, there's a lot of energy assistance. I mean, I think we could reduce poverty more by being more broad and increasing awareness of all the different benefits.
So that's a great point. I think one of the challenges here is the 50% match is 50% SNAP outreach dollars, federal dollars. So 400 to get to $1 million probably has to have a SNAP focus. Not to say you couldn't also do like the county thing we talked about.
Yeah,
where, through existing SNAP outreach, be both within SNAP, but the SNAP dollars are for SNAP outreach. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I'm thinking of the barrier that you talked about here in the peak system and could easily enroll in all benefits, but you're not financially incented. So is there a way?
No, it's beyond just incentive. You actually wouldn't be able to use SNAP dollars to sign someone up for leave, say. If you're in there, you can maybe do something, but then you can refer folks and stuff, but your primary focus has to be SNAP, because that's what the legislation. So, I mean, it's a great point. Like,
being on the cross alignment group that just does. Yeah, no, I understand.
I mean, you could request a portion that would not be intended for match for those other programs and funds.
Sure.
In addition, you know, another 100.
Take foundation match for like
you could
non-SNAP
separate.
component.
Okay.
Doing that administratively would be really challenging.
can be, yeah.
They already have to, I mean, you're already taking a percentage of an application. If you're completing an application that has multi-program, they're already doing an activity to
That's right. But
so it may not be as difficult as it sounds.
where it would be more difficult is if you're doing that with multiple programs, then you're doing that times each additional program. But it's not impossible, and it's a good idea. I think just we want to be clear that when we're saying 400,000 leverages to $1 million, that's for SNAP.
Right. So it would cut back on the total funding leverage, but it's a great point. If we're thinking about cross-program alignment.
Child programs and the children are highest in poverty, so.
Well, it can be a model like the Tri-County Health Department that we're looking at, where it's one FTE, 50% SNAP, 50% WIC. So 2 programs, you're talking about more than 2. But the but the 50% of the dollars that would be part of this $1 million is for SNAP. The other 50% of that FTE has come from some other.
And one other thing that really, another group that to consider, and part of that is the school-based health centers. They are really active in enrolling families in Medicaid because that's how they get reimbursed. But they, today, years ago, we had a meeting with them in Colorado trying to get them to refer. And I don't know if they may be doing that now, but that's another really easy group to get in front of is the Colorado Association for School-Based Health.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
They also have a good chunk of state funding. So the other is you could look at different mechanisms of where that money would go. Like if it went directly through, that funding goes through CDPHE. So if it went through CDPHE and you added on those restrictions or that activity with that specific funding, that's another mechanism you could leverage to get the money out.
Quick check for the folks on the phone. Were you able to receive this document?
Yes.
Okay, great. Sorry about that.
And this is Michael Vante with CDHE. I think this is extremely exciting and it's really great, a great idea. So please let me know how I can best help with any of those discussions and, getting stakeholders together or our campuses who maybe really been involved in this kind of work. Happy to be a resource.
Thank you.
So we'll probably take you up on that, Michael. Careful what you wish for.
Yeah.
You have I hate to
I'm
put you on
ready.
the spot, but do you mind just sharing a little bit about the survey that was just conducted?
Sure, absolutely. So this is the Hope Center out of, I think it's University of Temple, and it's the Real College Survey. Some of you might be familiar with it. They work with institutions of higher education throughout the country to be able to ask students about their situation in terms of housing insecurity or food insecurity. And they recently just did a combined report for the Denver area institutions of higher education. So I think that includes Community College of Denver, Metro State, CU Denver, Emily Griffith, and University of Denver, and kind of rolled the responses that they received from those surveys all up into kind of a Denver report. And I want to say, I think that on the top of my head, 41% of students within the Denver area identified as food insecure. And so this is something that we just want to highlight however we can to make sure people know about this story, especially with numbers, and continue to, one, get institutions to participate in the survey, and two, use those data to kind of inform things like this that I think could be very powerful.
Could that be shared through the group?
Sure, I'll send a link to the report in the chat box.
I think I heard that got a little broadcast. If I'm connecting to this right.
I heard something similar. Well, any other thoughts or ideas on partners that we would definitely want to run this by or have on board? Part of the idea is to get a bunch of feedback on this initial proposal and get it in good shape so that folks from this group can be using it to get more partners involved and on board so that we can bring this with a lot of support to the legislature.
Yeah, I mean,
Hi.
sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead. Sorry.
If you want to, please go ahead.
Okay. I don't know if this has been talked about already, but what about some of the grassroots nonprofit groups? Because they see people daily on a grassroots level, and I'm sure, just having that resource available will help people apply more easily than going to like the food stamps office or something like that.
Yeah, that's a great point. Part of what's pretty cool about the outreach dollars, in my opinion, is that once they are part of our state outreach plan, there's a fair amount of flexibility in how they work. People, feel free to jump in here. But one of the options for using them is sort of contracting out with those small grassroots nonprofits or health clinics or various different subrecipients who then can be trained and provided with technical assistance from the state or some of the larger outreach partners. And then they can be doing work with their own participants or clients rather than having it all at the state or county level.
Yeah, it's part of the model at the moment.
And there's a lot more opportunity.
That's right. Yeah. This Brett with Hunger Free. We find that people are much more often willing and interested in signing up when they have trusted relationships with the people they're working with, which are often these community-based nonprofits and
that's so true.
Community. And yet that individual small nonprofit probably doesn't have the ability or capacity to manage the entire grant, may not have that fiscal capacity. So part of our model is, and others too, is a subrecipient model where we'll provide training and technical assistance to nonprofits to do this work themselves. There's also like referral opportunities and also the ability for folks to send people to your location maybe once a month. So I think small community-based nonprofits are absolutely part of the way we solve this problem. And SNAP outreach dollars allow us to do that.
going off of that, do we partner with the early educator schools around Denver? Because some of them, like Clayton, they have their own health program that's connected with Children's Hospital, and they can work with the parents and things like that with applications.
I think this has the opportunity to go that direction.
Bless you. And the only other thing I was going to mention was from a strategy standpoint. I think it's always good to know, and Brett has a lot of experience in his former career of kind of like what the cost of the problem could be, right? Like, my guess is in the world it could be a lot. And then kind of having phased approaches to that, right? So like, this is the cost of the problem. This is how we could target all the high EB&E communities. This is how we could blah, 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 right? So just kind of knowing at all moments of the day, if you wanted to turn up the volume or turn down the volume on the proposal, where some points are that you can quickly be, right? So just going into that conversation with that knowledge so that you don't have to on the spot figure that out. Does that make sense? Yep.
So in terms of next steps, the next scheduled meeting for this project team is at 3 o'clock on Tuesday, October 8th. At this point, I think we're just planning on a meeting through Zoom, although there may or may not be a physical location available. If you did not attend the last meeting and you want to attend upcoming meetings, could you please let either Anya or Sarah know? And we will make sure that you're sent the calendar invitation. And then if you have any sort of line by line suggested edits to this document that Anya just handed out or that was just emailed out, we would also be interested in hearing your thoughts.
Yeah, please share any feedback with me. And I also think at some point we will need to bring this to the governing council, correct?
Yeah, and so yes, I think so. There's a governing council meeting this Friday, so I'd be happy to bring kind of the initial idea to that group on Friday. But is that comfortable for this work group? Not all of you, obviously, were part of that smaller legislative project team. So the other space we'd like to make sure that we kind of clear before we take things to the governing council is that this work group is comfortable with that direction. Are there concerns at this point about the general direction, obviously with a lot of comments and hashing out of things that we still need to do?
I just had a quick question. This is Kayla on the phone. In regards to feedback to this document, sorry to take a step back here, but how far into detail do you want to get as far as describing outreach, what those different prongs could look like, what that strategy could look like? I mean, is this more of just kind of giving us a basic idea that there's the 400K for outreach and that you don't want to go super into detail? I'm just thinking about wanting to provide feedback that's actually helpful in the goal of creating this document.
Yeah, that's a good question. I guess I would ask folks in the room who have more experience with making these funding proposals if you think it makes sense to go into that detail or to leave it a little more open, given that this would be funding for over a year from now.
So Jack, can I ask you a question? Because I'm only experienced from like a state perspective of how that looks. I have less experience from the other side. Like, how do you get funds when you're not the state? What do those proposals look like?
We'll sometimes have a longer memo like this, and then we'll condense it to a one-page handout that we use actually for the lobbying.
Okay.
And then we'll do the information on the front side and usually include endorsements on the back side.
Okay. Which would look different than a state proposal, because I would suggest that a state proposal is usually like 14 pages of text and data.
Could we see what you had used?
No, what do you got?
Well, we're going through.
Nothing? No coffees?
Because the only thing we had found from your request for last year was just a one-pager, basically.
Oh,
it was just, I'm just talking about the SNAP outreach. I mean, it was.
Because it's public once it went in November 1st of last year, so yes, we can share all of.
Okay.
That would be fantastic. Because that's the other thing we want to keep in mind is that we want this to be in addition to the rural funding, not replacing it.
But Kayla, to your question.
I want to make sure that that's merged here.
To your question, I would say feel free to provide as much detail as you might be interested in giving, and then with the understanding that this document may eventually be condensed into an abridged version that we would use later.
Yeah, and I'd especially love to hear feedback on just like the framing of how this fits into education and making sure we're using the right language and whatnot.
Thank you.
Okay.
All right. Anything else to add for the legislative group before we move along?
I guess separate from the content of what was discussed, this is a process question perhaps for Erin. In the future, as the work groups are going to be meeting independently of this group, or the subgroups, I don't know what we're actually calling them, will we be getting notes and attendance? Does that make sense? So like, it's helpful to know that like, this is what you concluded, but when you're asking me like, am I confident in it? Part of what I want to know is like, who collectively participated in that discussion? Because if it was just you two, then I feel like you're kind of being sneaky, right? So will that be shared in the future?
Yeah, so we do the notes and attendance, they're taken at every meeting already, and they're usually posted on the website. We can change that process too to send them out.
Like when the agenda gets sent out, it's just a push versus a pull.
Like previous meetings.
Yeah, please, thank you.
Yeah, that's a great idea, because then you can get feedback from the whole group too in a more timely fashion.
Yeah, for sure. Happy to do that.
All right. Well, I think our next update then is coming from the technology project team, which I can speak a little bit to. Matt, would you mind chiming in if they're ready?
I'll help as best I can.
Okay. So the technology team is working primarily on county telephonic signature, and we talked a little bit about text message communications, and very briefly about peak as well. I'd say based on that first meeting, the most interest and excitement is on county telephonic signature, which as a little bit of background is enabling county offices to do the actual SNAP application or recertification or change report over the phone and submit it, rather than say someone calls in and needs to submit a new application, them having to go do that separately through Peak or through an outreach partner, and then coming back to complete their interview and verification process.
And I'd add for redeterminations as well. I know people use the word application in different ways, but a lot of interest in that. I think we wanted to understand what other counties outside the metro area, the people that were in that meeting, also are thinking about. So I think we have some diligence to do in terms of understanding that. How widely is it being thought about? And I think texting was another thing of great interest, and maybe less so on the peak at the moment. I think we were talking about sort of backburning that a bit and monitoring it, but there's a lot of effort going on in other areas for peak, right? Another thing we discussed at free associations, I recall the meeting, is that the sub-pack at the state level, and Carly might talk to us more, is also on telephonic signatures, identified that as something to move forward. So making sure that we're aligning there, and that I think we have an understanding of who's doing what, so that we're not crossing each other and we're complementing and aligning rather than going over the same ground.
So Terry is actually the point person for that. So we did at the last economic sub-pack group propose a work group specifically to look at or examine telephonic signature. In the room and on the phone, there was great interest from the counties. They did vote to move it forward. I don't know if people have actually signed up with you, have they?
Not yet. We'll be sending out another email ping to the counties. We've only had one county, Denver. Send me their interest. So still waiting for other counties to type in. We will hopefully get our first meeting probably next month, so we can establish the actual participants, county level participants.
And so I don't know how the process works, but we should probably connect. Some folks should connect to talk about sort of who's doing what and how. Where can we add most value for this subgroup, right? Subgroup.
I would also mention that I think it was about a month ago at the SNAP quarterly directors meeting, it was discussed there as well, and also great interest. So having only one county sign up so far is not a reflection of people's interest in the capacity to do it. I think it's just a timing issue. So I'm not actually concerned. I think there is a lot of good interest around it.
Good. Lots going on likewise.
Yeah, things happening right now.
So you two are the co-chairs? Could I just verify who was the co-chairs? Sorry, I wasn't clear on that. Or that's not established?
I don't think we're fully established, but
Okay.
there's interest from Denver County, as well as perhaps Marianne with Hunger Free Colorado.
Totally fine, I
Runs our
just
hotline.
directed towards Matt.
We got an email from Todd suggesting
Todd
that.
said maybe this, okay.
Yeah. So didn't want to have to play that card. And then Terry, I don't know your availability or interest. You seem like you might be a natural co-chair for this.
Probably, yeah.
And that was, just the way you two were talking, there was an assumption in my mind that you were co-chairing. That is not what I'm suggesting.
It might make it the easiest way to keep them aligned. That's your group. Internal county group.
And I think Hunger Free is quite interested as well. And, however we want to work it. It wasn't a complete surprise to me. I expected
Okay,
so very happy.
Right here, what you're saying.
Better than no chair.
Great.
Tri-chair is better than no chair.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That sounds fantastic. And can you talk a little bit about the use cases and having that be a deliverable?
Well, I think Becca Frank, who is a fellow with Denver Human Services, working on some sort of technology and customer engagement opportunities for us in Denver, has done more around the texting, I think, the use cases for outreach to customers than the telephonic signatures. I've got like 5 different use cases in my mind for telephonic signatures, but Becca's been working on something different there so far, to my knowledge.
Okay.
For the telephonics, I mean, I personally look at it as opportunities within a human services department from the non-assistant sides to be working with the assistant sides, which, like most organizations, we've got our silos, right? And being able to provide more real-time service to others within our county human services department, say child welfare, who people out in the field see a family who could use some help and assistance and prevention services and connecting us more quickly in real time with the customer that way. And then a use case with partners, where partners obviously don't have the ability to determine benefits right there, maybe some arrangements in a model where there's some tight connections where they can get quicker in line at the county human services department. It's a possibility, again, because we could possibly serve them. We've got flexible enough business processes on the county side, more in real time there rather than a referral that takes more time. So there's a couple use cases which have a lot of different permutations.
Yeah, so part of what we were thinking about with that group, in order to make sure that we're not duplicating with SubPac, is that we were thinking it could be a good place for us to be mapping out those different use cases and the various benefits of these different technology investments, since if it's not just purely a group of counties, we're probably not the best group to be figuring out the exact administrative details of how each county is going to run this. So that's what we were thinking around what one of the deliverables of that group could be.
And then someone else in our agency brought up just on the texting, running a couple of the ideas by him. So in our technology group said, when we look at texting, are we interested in other forms of outreach and generalizing that a bit based on customer preference? So texting obviously probably has a lot of potential, but this person's feedback was, well, how about the customer choice there? Is it text? Is it email? Is it something that works for them? An automated voicemail? I don't know. Things in different ways, and would the group be interested in looking a little wider than just the texting? So I just put that out there. We might want to talk about that at the next meeting. I don't want to bust the scope, but it was an interesting idea.
Yeah.
So Matt, can we ask who, did we have any client voice at that meeting?
I don't think there was at this meeting.
No, we did not.
But I mean, given that we're asking those kinds of questions, we're talking about the experience of the client, is there support that we can provide you all in helping to get more client voice at that meeting?
Sounds like a good idea, thank you.
Doesn't Kathy Underhill have a group?
A group? I don't believe so, not under her current role, but we, the department, do.
Okay.
And also we have client voice participating in Blueprint. So I just think that part of our intentionality, right? We need to be more intentional about that, and that sounds like a perfect place where we need it. Yeah. And we, the governing council or members thereof, need to support that.
Maybe caveat to that is depends on what nature those meetings are. So
Yeah.
If you're trying to really work out the logistics of telephonic signature.
I don't even want to go to that meeting. Nobody wants to.
But that's a different meeting than like client, how do you want to be contacted?
That's right. How are we driving the vision of this? Yeah.
Right. And so I totally agree, a client voice is important at some point in this conversation, but you guys might figure out where it makes sense to each other.
Welcome always, but where we might need it, like we really need it, we need to do a better job of making sure that we need to do a better job of that. So I think if you want to reach out to any of us on the governing council or your worker chairs, like raising your hand, like this is the moment in time, then like we have to commit and energize ourselves to do something.
Yeah, we're happy to help when that time comes. Just let us know how we can be helpful. Do you all have another meeting date set?
I don't think we've scheduled that one yet.
For the technology,
no.
No, but we were gonna, so if leads for those groups can stay after this meeting, we'll get some lead meetings on the calendar so that we can start getting those scheduled. We realize we have like 25 different meetings to schedule between now and the end of October, so we're just playing a little Tetris. But yes, we will get it on the books.
Okay. Well, thank you for agreeing to serve in the co-chair role.
On the spot.
Thank Todd as well.
I'm embellishing a bit.
But it sounds like things are moving in the right direction. Sounds exciting to me. Any other questions or comments about this project team?
I guess one thing I would say is that, one of my approaches is or perspectives on it. We call it a technology group, but I for one see it as a lot of different things. Technology and the data and the whatever. I'm not a technology person, but that's one aspect of it. I happen to look at it more as a sort of process and partnership and maybe regulation with consents and stuff like that. Those other parts of what has to be set up in order to make the technology systems often the simplest thing. So when we think technology, just know, I don't, in my mind, we're not limited to a lot of bits, technology bits and data systems. It's, I think, to me, more than that. So everybody's input on the other stuff will be helpful, and we may be coming to others to ask about that technology stuff.
It's kind of a process improvement group with a technology component.
Yes.
It's largely client correspondence right now.
Yeah.
Well,
Maybe that's an agenda item for the next meeting.
Quick question, Kiki, you had indicated that someone from OIT might be interested in participating.
I reframed that to say we asked OIT to participate. Because I don't think if we're driving a technology solution, that the owner of our system shouldn't be participating in that. It just doesn't make sense to me. So I know they indicated that they would be supportive of that effort. So I think once you guys have the next meeting date, if you would share that, Terry and Carla and I can get somebody there.
And I think it also depends on at what point do we bring them in, because if we've already decided this is the direction that we want to go, and then we actually say this is what we need and want, that might be a better use of time. But I think that there are also policy implications around how we move forward with some of this that we should think of differently, so that we're applying things. So I might actually, Terry and I might chat and see if there's somebody else within our team who would be good to send. I know Andrea Seiler was on the last one, but yeah, she's definitely more that end user
that
side
lane,
than the policy side.
But we will get somebody there.
Okay.
Thank you.
Well, I trust all of you to make sure the right people are at the table, but if we can be helpful in bringing in community partners, let us know. Cool. So the next project team, cross-program alignment. Anybody want to share out on that?
Sure. So great group. Sandy Stimmark and myself have volunteered anyway. I don't think that's formal yet. Definitely love having Matt or other county representation there. CHS is huge. part of what we got to figure out is there's a lot of different cross-referral opportunities. We probably can't solve all of them, so which one are we trying to solve? And then let's get the right people in the room. So we did talk a bit about med and SNAP, and if that were the case, we'd want HICPUF there for sure. Whereas if we wanted to do education, we probably want CDE there. Everybody's welcome, of course, but can't solve the world. So part of our challenge is which piece of the solution are we going after, and who needs to be at the table. I think that's probably about.
And I think the other thing is understanding what is already going on with data sharing and cross referrals at the state now, and other states' best practices and policies which increase cross enrollment in programs, including joint outreach, joint recertification, where are the greatest opportunities, like Brett said.
Yeah, and also not stepping on state toes where like you guys are already meeting in some cases, I think. Not trying to replicate that. But
I think one thing that's unique for that project team is that there is some grant funding available that group is going to kind of help rethink through what that scope of work will look like. So that's the one project team right now that has a little bit of funding behind it, which is exciting.
And where is that grant funding coming from?
So it's from the Colorado Health Foundation. It was a grant that was given to the Colorado Prevention Alliance to build out and train on a toolkit for community-based organizations to screen and refer for SNAP and WIC. And that may very well be the scope, but I think there's a lot of work that's happened over the past year since that grant was awarded that we want to make sure is reflected in the new scope.
Okay. So it sounds like you were making soft asks.
Well, we don't know who we are as a group yet, other than Sandy and myself have expressed interest
and Aaron.
Figure out what that focus is.
And I think what we'd love to do too is send out to the group what people know about where we are now with your different organizations and with the state and Benefit Data Trust. What have you done with data matching or other programs? What's worked, what hasn't worked? And so we were going to get together at the next meeting and get really specific questions that we wanted everyone to come back and help fill out. And then also, if you know of other state practices, or we were going to look at other state best practices and try to understand from them, and then come back and present the findings.
And you do have a meeting set, right? Oh, I'm sorry.
This is Kayla on the phone. Sorry. It did feel like there was a pretty clear question at hand, though, in the last meeting. And excuse me if I misunderstood, but I know that we did talk about how there are multiple toolkits out there. And just the question of, yes, gathering data on what's working, what's not working, but really more intentionally looking at what toolkits are working and what toolkits are not working in regards to cross-program alignment. And again, please correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that that question feels pretty specific to me. And I think that knowing all of the expertise in the room on this larger work group, I feel like that is a question that I gathered from our last meeting to the bigger group. But again, please correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah.
So I think that's accurate. I think one of the issues is that that's very closely associated with the funding that Aaron was talking about. And this group wasn't born out of meeting that funding need necessarily. So I think it's both and.
Makes sense, yeah.
But you're right that specific question was asked related to the existing grant funding.
So do y'all know when you're going to be meeting next?
I think it was just scheduled. I think it's October 3rd or 4th.
So the leads are meeting October 3rd, I think. And then we have to get the full project team meeting
Okay. Is there anything that this work group can do to be supportive between now and your next meeting?
Well, if you're interested in this broad idea, let us know. But part of it is until we figure out what's out there and where we want to go, it's hard to make a specific ask.
Okay. We'll just keep this in mind if we can be helpful.
The specific piece about toolkits, though, that's probably a good idea, is if when we say toolkit, there's a bunch of toolkits out there for SNAP outreach. States put one together. There's one for medical providers. There's a bunch out there. That's part of what we're trying to coal up. So you happen to know a bunch, send them our way. But again, that's really very closely related to the grant funding, not necessarily specific to general cross-referral. I don't know if I made that.
Are toolkits helpful, or do people?
I mean, that's part of what we're figuring out.
That's our question.
Yeah.
So that's what this grant was about. Is that really the best use of those grant dollars?
Okay.
I think, my experience with toolkits is if they exist, right, and they have been shown, like I'm thinking, Sandy, we had done one with the medical providers a few years ago. I do think that for certain populations, they're just certain language things, right, that like I may not be familiar with as a medical provider, but if we learn that those are the right words that resonate with the right people, then knowing that information when you're trying to get them on, I don't want to say on your side, that's not the right thing, but like get them excited about doing the thing we want them to do. Like, I think that's particularly helpful language, and knowing what that language is that resonates with people.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. Really knowing the different systems' language and how to cross that, and what are the special things that you need from the medical setting as far as HIPAA, patient protection.
Yeah, that's right.
I think, and in each system, I think there's some similarities, but also some differences.
And I mean, that goes back to this proposal, Anya, that you showed us, right? You have 3 target groups, and those are very different, right? And what you're going to want to say to a community counseling higher ed person is going to look different than a child care provider, right? I don't know that you want to spend lots of money on toolkits, like endless toolkits for every population, because that's exhausting. But at some point, I do think, like, if those materials exist, why not learn from what people have already done? That's not going to harm you.
Okay. Any closing comments or questions for this project team?
And once we have the project team meetings, October will probably be a little bit random just because it's coming up, but we will set reoccurring monthly dates and times just for our own sanity. So we'll send those out both through the work groups as well as through the Blueprint newsletter, because there's going to be project teams popping up in all of the work groups. So making sure that if there's topics that people are interested in, there's ways to engage, or if you have colleagues or anything like that that might be interested in participating in those project teams, we'll get that communication out more broadly.
Great.
So next on the agenda, we have an update from our state partners on some of the rule changes and rulemaking that's coming up.
Like, what are we doing?
And this group previously has expressed interest in the voluntary employment first. So if there's any movement on that in terms of regulatory changes, I think would be of interest.
We have our internal regulation workers with the counties and is this week, so we are working on finalizing our draft of first draft, second version of our first potential regs. Generally what I've done with the others is after the work group's already kind of gotten sort of a semi-formal draft, then I can present it. We'll probably be looking at going to board November or December. And timing of getting it finalized, and then whether or not it would be emergency or not. Those are some things we have not yet finalized.
Is that something you'd be willing to share with this group before it's posted formally for public comment?
This is only voluntary.
It's a whole rewrite of the work requirements section, which includes voluntary employment and training, but we also would like to rewrite it because it's written out. We take our whole work requirement section. which includes the making it clear that EF is voluntary.
And when does EF officially become voluntary?
October 1st.
October, okay, so some of these changes we should see before the regulation.
Yes, there's really nothing in our regulation that would prevent us from becoming voluntary, because there's already language in there about voluntary or mandatory, and county opting in. So there's nothing preventing us from going voluntary in our regulation. This will just allow our regulations to be cleaner once we go. So yes, October 1, we are going voluntary. Our plan has been approved by.
So are there other substantive changes that you're expecting? That's a big one. One we're very excited about. But are there other changes, including in particular the ABOD time limit exemptions that you're expecting?
So those would not necessarily need to be in our regulation. Our regulations refer to the state plan where we get our waivers approved, and then if we're using certain approved exemptions through the state plan, just to allow us some flexibility in what exemptions we put in the state plan.
I'm thinking in this regulatory rule packet, are there any anticipated changes to the section about the ABOD exemptions? No.
What were you thinking?
I was kind of hoping that we could have more specific delineation about unfit to work, including victims of domestic
Well,
violence.
that's not an ABOD exemption though, that's a work requirement exemption. And that is being added.
Okay. Great.
Yeah, sorry, I thought I was
Anything else that?
getting too specific.
Anything fun? Anything else getting there?
Anything fun?
Anything good? That's good. That's a really good one.
Yeah,
That's a
no,
really good
that's part of the rewrite is being a little more open and clear about unfit for employment.
Okay.
Medically or physically unfit, making sure it's broad enough. But we've also been training on it. We don't want to get too prescriptive in the regulation because then sometimes people can narrow it instead of broadening it like we want it to be.
Okay.
It sort of happened with how we currently have defined homelessness in our regs. People are taking it so literally, they're not expanding it to the other population that it really could entail.
Okay.
So
We're going to be
it's
real
a
interested in
balance.
seeing what wording changes are proposed. Do you have any sense about when that might be available for this group to consider?
Not till after our work group one this week.
Okay. But maybe as early as next week?
You're so ambitious. She's, so
You know,
after
my
the
bosses
work
have me
group-
do nothing else but that, maybe.
I would say after the work group, right, it sounds like we need to
Yeah.
incorporate the feedback that we get from the work group, so as soon as that's done. But you guys, some of you in this room are participating in that work group, so
Sarah's
you
coming to
know
work group, I'm
what
sure.
that looks
Jack, you're
like.
always
I have to go by phone this time, I'm sorry.
I know, but we would like to be able to benefit from the broader knowledge of this work group.
We hear you, and we will share that.
Is there anything that partners in the room can help with this October 1 big change, or that we should be aware of?
You know, we are going to do some training with our specific contracted outreach partners, hopefully in October, to give you all a little more idea of what's going on. But I think the main part is just understanding that individuals are not going to be required to participate with Employment First. There's a little caveat there, our able-bodied adults without dependents, that population of 18 to 49-year-old, children in their household, they still have to track their participation, make sure they're eligible for SNAP, and that will be done through the Employment First program. So it will feel like ABODs are required. They will not be sanctioned. There won't be a disqualification if they don't participate with Employment First. They would lose their ability to have their tracked months counted if they're not participating with Employment First, but so there still will be a population that, because the federal government requires that we track their population, their participation monthly, we are using Employment First as our mechanism to track. So it's a good thing. It helps us track them so they can retain their employment or their SNAP. But it's good technical.
Is there anything you can think of around that work group 1 could be supporting? So that work group is around communication. Like, is there pieces of this that should be communicated out to the general public or through community-based organizations so that clients are aware of these changes? That would be helpful.
Yeah, I think some of that messaging around the
biggest change that a lot of states have seen when they've gone to from a mandatory program to a voluntary program is that they struggle then getting participants who actually want to come in and participate. But most programs, when they go to a voluntary program, are very strong programs because they can spend more time per participant. They can help that participant actually achieve some of their goals. So what could be helpful is helping us promote the employment and training programs or employment first programs in the counties and the benefit that that program can have to help a FA recipient, maybe gain better employment or switch careers or things like that. That'll be the hardest thing I think this next year is switching it from a feeling of this mandatory program that's a bad thing to a voluntary program that can actually help you succeed. I think some messaging around that could be helpful.
So messaging around how it's an added benefit to this program.
Yeah.
It's a work support program. Yeah, where I think in the past, it's just like what we've seen with the kind of evolution with SNAP in general. If you talk about it as a nutrition support program or nutrition access program, people are much more likely to be reciprocal with that kind of communication. But if you talk about this going voluntary as a work support program, like it is meant to actually assist people to upscale their employability and if they're underemployed, kind of bring that up. So it's very different, I think, in how it's communicated than it was in the past.
On that note, how would we, if we're asked, how would we distinguish the benefits of participating voluntarily at Employment First as opposed to just going to your community's workforce development center or a nonprofit that would provide similar job training skills?
It's a really good question. And one of the things I would actually say is that there are like 11 federal agencies who all align with this. So the Workforce Innovation Act, Workforce Innovation and Opportunities Act, there's so many different agencies. So it's not as though we ever want to say this is somehow better than going to your American Workforce Center or that this is, it's just different. I think in a lot of ways it can actually connect people to other resources that wouldn't be available otherwise, including things like tools and uniforms and things like that. So there's more going on there than just connecting them to the training aspect. There's actual other tangible things. Transportation systems can be included, stuff like that.
Okay.
So it's not like we're better, but all the other ones are good too.
Okay. I wonder if there could be almost even a chart that says, like, if you need this, go to your workforce center. If you need this, then go to Employment First. Or these are the nonprofits that can provide. Because I'm not even clear what the differences are and when you should go to one versus the other.
Well, and part of the role of Employment First is to help our clients navigate those. So they could come in the Employment First door, but as the counselor is working with that individual, they might determine the WIOA program will be better for you. Let me refer you, and it's sort of like a joint work. They're working with the client at the same time.
Okay.
So it's not, like Carla said, it's not an either or. What's better could be both and.
And when that referral takes place, if they, I don't want to say switch programs, but if they walk through that other door, their participation in that counts for SNAP ENT.
Right.
So it's not as though you have to choose and then all of a sudden you lose something on the other side. It is more of a both and.
Okay. Well, thank you for your hard work on this and then for your willingness to share that rule packet with this group once it's ready to share. Are there other proposed rule changes that you're expecting? I know that the cost of living adjustments will have to be repassed as a permanent rule. Are there anything else that you guys are working on that would be of interest to this group?
We had a technical snafu and a change we were making. So we'll be bringing a piece to board probably in November related to drug and alcohol treatment centers. Actually went through the board, but
It's always a thing.
So it's nothing new. It's about how we prorate benefits when an individual leaves the drug and alcohol treatment center. We still do hope to have some household composition clarities coming in the next year, as well as a couple other little technical rewrites, but some of that will be discussed in the work group as to what pieces are ready to move forward, where do we need more work on, certain sections. The one we know for sure is Employment First.
This isn't a whole change, but noticing around exemptions is So I'm
Great.
we're chipping away at it as fast as we can.
Yay, that's great.
We have another question.
So going back to the sanctions piece, how does that rule change impact folks that are already sanctioned for requirement?
Yes, so, FNS can come back and clarify for us that once, so currently, today, because it's not October 1, so if an individual is referred them from the first and they do not show up to their appointments or they stop attending the appointments, they receive a sanction. They're called level sanctions in the county. So basically, it's if it's your first time, it's 30 days. If it's your second, it's 3 months. Third and subsequent, 6 months. So you have to serve that out, and then you have to also cooperate with the first to regain your SNAP. We initially thought that come October 1, all of those would be wiped clean. FNS has clarified that no, the individual still has to serve out that sanction period. So even though there's nothing they can do to comply it, because essentially October 1, all those have complied because we're a volunteer program. Since it was actually already issued to the client and they're in that sanction, they have to serve out that sanction period. But then once they serve that out, they can just reapply. They don't have to go and cooperate. They just serve the 30 days, they can reapply.
Their cases, so their family, their children are already receiving, would they just pick up on
Yeah,
that?
we just add
Okay.
the person the next month. So that type of level sanction goes away unless it's a voluntary quit, which is kind of technical. So after October 1st, the only real individuals at risk of losing their benefits if they aren't compliant with the work requirement is an ABOD. That's because they have very specific federal rules around that.
Yeah.
Thank you for that update.
Sure.
Any other questions for our state partners? Really appreciate your willingness to participate in this group and to keep us abreast of the good stuff you're working on. Really excited about the updates to the notices around exemptions. This has been a long-standing issue, so a little bit of background. There's a variety of exemptions that someone might qualify for that would remove the 3-month time limit on able-bodied adults without dependents. But the notices haven't included those categories of exemptions. And so the state has agreed to add those exemptions so that people will know whether or not they should be subject to these mandatory time limits. So that's very exciting as well. Really appreciate that.
And you talked about timeframes there, because any change to noticing, right, is not something that happens tomorrow. It's something that's built into CVMS. So just to be clear, I think we're working towards a winter-ish timeframe.
Yeah, I mean, at this point, it's just a matter of us ensuring that the expense events go through the right space, that we get the language approved by our federal partners, stuff like that. So, yeah, it's moving along far more quickly than it has in the past.
That's great.
Thank you. So next up, I just wanted to give everybody a very brief update on public charge because I know we've talked about that at various points in this group. So public charge is referring to a rule change that came from the federal level related to immigrants who are applying to change their visa status or for a green card. And the proposed rule would enable USCIS to consider things like benefit use of programs, including SNAP and Medicaid, when deciding if someone is likely to become a public charge and can enter the US. So we're very concerned about it because of the chilling effect associated with it. So even people who wouldn't necessarily face a public charge test are opting to disenroll from programs just out of an abundance of caution and because it's a very confusing rule. So we, at Hunger Free Colorado, we put together some materials that are food assistance specific. So if those would be useful to anyone, please let me know and we'll share them. But I mostly wanted to bring it up today because the implementation date for that proposed rule would be October 15th. That being said, there are 7 cases in 4 different venues that have been brought against it at this point, and hearings, preliminary injunction hearings, begin on those October 2nd. So there is a possibility that in those couple weeks before it's supposed to be implemented, it would be blocked by a judge's ruling. So we're paying really close attention to that, and we'll update everybody. But those first couple weeks of October, we'll either be updating materials and sharing that with everybody, or fingers crossed it could be blocked. So I just wanted to let everyone know that that's coming and could be implemented October 15th, also could not. Any questions?
That WIC's not.
Yes.
Of course it impacts me, but.
I'll just add in, not a question, but I know that the Health Foundation, and I may butcher this because I'm not in charge of this project, but I know one of my coworkers has a small contract with Cody Belsley, who was previously at the Colorado Children's Campaign and is doing a lot of independent consulting work now, but to do some consolidation of resources around public charge across all of the programs, not just food assistance, and try to ensure that there is some common messaging. So I know she may be reaching out to some of you to draw upon existing resources, but also to help identify any gaps that there might be if this does go into effect, to make sure that we are getting information out to the counties and to the clients that will be impacted. So
that's great. That's great.
It's fun.
Anything else on that? That's all I have.
The Academy of Pediatrics has an immigration toolkit too that might have some resources.
The next up we have Robert Wood Johnson funding.
Sure, I also do not need 15 minutes, but just really briefly wanted to highlight a funding opportunity that's out right now around building up evidence on nutrition supports for low-income families with young children. So we have a number of kind of Colorado proposals which are going to be submitted. So they're all proposals which kind of fill in spaces within the blueprint where I think we're missing some evidence, or there's different research out there that can be happening. So just for some very brief descriptions, and not all of these organizations have confirmed all of them, so I don't, you can talk about your own, those of you who are in here. But there are a few healthcare providers who are coming together to pilot some different models of screening and referral for WIC and SNAP. And evaluate kind of the efficacy of those and what's working and what's not working. So that's one exciting proposal. CSU is considering doing a proposal, I think with WIC in particular, but would be looking at kind of essentially what it costs to apply and stay on the program versus the benefits that people are actually getting. So, you know, what's the actual value of signing up for a program like WIC, which I think could have some pretty strong basis for the increasing the minimum benefit level, depending on what it says. But my guess is that it's going to take a little bit more time. Might be worth it. But encourage everyone to sign up. Still, it's great. And then Hunger Free, and you can talk a little bit about your proposal. And then lastly, the American Heart Association is also considering applying, looking at some of the SNAP outreach materials that Work Group 1 is creating and kind of the evidence around those and evaluating them. So there are lots and lots of proposals and ideas from the state, which is awesome. So if you or someone you know is applying, I have written just like a really short paragraph from the blueprint, kind of in support of all those proposals. They're all really different. I think ideally, you know, we can come up with some of these project ideas as work groups and project teams in the future, but obviously I don't yet have that infrastructure quite fully built out. But yeah, I think it's exciting to see how many people are kind of engaged around this. Do you want to share a little bit?
Sure, yeah, you've been really supportive without that infrastructure, so thank you for that. So what we're looking at doing is taking a look at the intersection between housing and SNAP. So sort of 30,000-foot view, housing is one of the largest expenses for most families, that and childcare. The way SNAP deals with housing is what they call an excess shelter deduction. So that's 50%, after you do standard deduction and stuff like that, 50%, beyond 50% of your income, you can then deduct to have a higher benefit. That excess shelter deduction is indexed to inflation, so it does go up over time. as inflation goes up over time, but the housing market doesn't follow inflation. And it really doesn't in certain communities. So you have equity issues there, and the different housing communities are experiencing this differently. Over time, you're seeing a big difference, but ultimately, people's rent in many communities is getting much, much higher quickly, and that's not being reflected by the role of excess shelter reduction index to housing. So what we're looking at doing is studying that and getting a sense of the scale and scope and extent. So like how many people are actually impacted by this and how much. One thing we know from national data in 2017, so it's a little bit old, probably worse now, and it's also national data, but 26.5% of children were on cases that hit that excess shelter deduction cap. And then 14.5% of children were in a household that hit that cap and didn't get the maximum benefit. That's the other piece going on here, right? So about 14.5% of children could have been in a household getting a higher benefit if that cap were something greater. So what we're looking at is how big of a deal is this, and then hoping to, as part of the project, work with state, county, and community organization partners to come up with some policy solutions and model those policy solutions. So the easiest, biggest, most expensive would be remove the cap. But there's probably other solutions that might index to other things, or maybe just increase it, whatever. We'll see what we want to do. I think it's a good idea, but if the money comes through, it would start in March and be a 12-month project using institutional data. So there's different levels in the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation. This is the lowest level, the $75,000 for 12 months.
But is that a state policy or a federal policy, the housing cap?
Federal.
That's a federal.
Yeah.
Okay.
And are there any states that have been able to obtain a waiver to completely eliminate the cap?
Not that I'm aware of, no.
I think the cap is different in like Hawaii and Alaska.
Lower 48, it's all the same, and then it varies Alaska, Hawaii, and I think they're looking, yeah, but.
Are there any other states working on this, to try to get one of those waivers?
I don't think
It's not a waiver, it's part of
There's no waiver for it, so this would actually have to be a complete overhaul.
So what we're thinking is, and this would probably not be in the application, but putting the Farm Bill and policy changes in the Farm Bill that could make a big difference, this being one of them, and getting evidence for that.
Okay.
And then also, there could be local solutions in the meantime. So if a local community having to have some excess dollars they wanted to spend on, say, SNAP benefit, maybe one of the things you tie it to is housing.
Okay.
Who knows? But that would be, those policy positions would be part of the project.
But this couldn't be waived. This would have to be federally changed in statute?
Yeah. Yeah, so to give some context, if any of you have heard of the Closing the Meal Gap Act, which has been introduced for a couple years now in the House, this is one of the recommendations that's part of that bill, but it's one that has a little less evidence behind it because no one's actually been able to implement it. Like some states have increased minimum benefit. That's also one of the pieces of that legislation, so there is that evidence behind it. And one of the pieces of that bill would be to remove the excess shelter cap, which it's already removed for households that have someone with a disability or an older adult, so we know how it impacts that population, but we're specifically looking at that households with children and to develop some more of that evidence looking forward.
So the grant application would give you money for research, but also to fund that gap.
No money for the implementation, just the research and modeling the cost of solutions. So we know like how many kids in which communities are being impacted, how much, if we were to say remove the cap, how much would that cost?
So philosophical research, not.
Well, it's research. It's not, no one's life is going to be better because of it, but it would give us evidence to suggest how your life might be better should we change
I mean, that's, yeah, I'm not judging, like, that's not, trying to understand.
Yeah. The cost of the national intervention would not fit within a.
Got it. I just wanted to understand what we were doing there.
Yes.
I mean, it's very that's fascinating.
I think it has the potential to align with, say, our concept of adequacy of benefit and to leverage federal dollars to do that as opposed to try to go after state general fund.
If you intended, so did you get Department of, or have you been working with housing?
We've been talking to housing folks, but no, we don't have
A letter of support yet from them? Okay.
It was due today.
It's due tomorrow. I don't think we're going to get it before tomorrow, but the first iteration here is a brief. It's 3-page, high level.
Okay.
And then if you're invited in December is when the final.
Got it.
Yeah.
Yep. So just chat with us after about this.
Okay.
And I also realized there was one additional proposal that I didn't mention, which is WIC is applying with Kaiser to really look at kind of joint interoperability between the clinic systems at Kaiser and WIC referrals to see if they can close that loop. So yeah, there's some great ideas, and we'll keep you informed as partners are willing to share. So thank you so far for being willing to share. Who, if anyone gets selected to do proposals, and we can figure out how this group can contribute or just keep updated.
Great.
All of that.
Okay. Well, we're ahead of schedule today, which is good. We might get out a little early. In terms of moving forward, since these project teams are in full swing, we thought it might be a bit redundant and a little too demanding on your time for us to still be meeting as a full work group monthly. And so we were going to suggest that perhaps we could have one more meeting this year in November, so we can still report out on how the project teams are doing. And then beginning in 2020, we were going to suggest that this work group meet quarterly. And so I just wanted to see how you all felt about that. Anyone here does that not feel good?
I think it feels great.
Yeah. Okay.
Been in a lot of meetings.
All right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's with the understanding that we'll be building out a communication structure from the project teams to you all, even if we're not meeting on a monthly basis. So we'll figure out how to make the information flow in a way that works and where we're all staying in the loop, but not having to meet multiple times every month.
Now for November, we usually meet the fourth Monday of the month, but that is the week of Thanksgiving. So I don't know how folks might feel about pushing that up a week to the 18th.
So are you suggesting we're skipping October and going to November, and then going quarterly from there?
That's right.
Just verifying that
That's right.
tracking correctly.
Mm-hmm.
Does anyone here have any strong preferences between the 18th or the 25th of November?
18th.
18th, okay.
All right.
All right.
It's the same time, the 1 to 3.
Yeah, I'm assuming that works for the Health Foundation still hosts this then.
Let me check rooms right now.
If not, we can ask for volunteers to host.
I'm sure we can figure that out.
Okay.
Phone folks, does that sound good to all of you?
Sounds great.
Yeah, it works.
All right.
November the 18th.
November the 18th.
Will it be 1 to 3?
Yes. And I have to apologize, we'll put this in our emails, but the email account of the person who created all of the ongoing Blueprint meetings has been closed, and our IT contractor said it is not possible to open it. So you have emails on your calendars in perpetuity, which is really horrifying, that we cannot delete. So we'll be sending out some communication about that, but just sorry in advance. The logistics of that are not ideal, especially if your life is on your calendar, i.e. mine. So yeah, we'll be sending out communication, but just, yeah, sorry in advance for that.
Right.
Cool. Since we do have a little bit of extra time, does anyone have any general updates for the group?
Oh, Today is the last day to submit your comment on broad-based categorical eligibility for SNAP, which is what lets us raise the gross income limit to 200%. So if you haven't gotten that in, you have a few hours left. You're welcome to use Hunger Free's site, hungerfreecolorado.org/advocate.
I think the only other thing we had talked about this last time, part of us going to the voluntary model, if you recall, is that we're also looking for a statewide vendor for running our employment services for counties that have opted to let kind of a state administered or contract administered person entity do that. That contract, my understanding, or the RFP is supposed to be going out. Carla, I know you don't own this, but I want to say in the next 2 weeks-ish. You really don't own it, so it's fine. Oh, okay. Anyways,
Listen to me.
part of what we're gonna be, one, we wanted to share that with this work group because going voluntary was such a, what is the word I'm looking for? Desire of this work group, but we need your support in that desire. And so we're gonna ask not only this work group, but the governing council and CHF to, you have friends. We would like those friends to bid.
We're also releasing the request for quotations for an evaluation contractor for the blueprint. So it's getting posted on the website today, and we'll send out through some networks that we've got. And it'll again go in the newsletter as well. But if you know any good evaluation contractors, we will be taking proposals through October 24th.
One quick update that happened in the middle of this meeting. I think we all received an email from Christina Apostolowski, who represents Young Invincibles, and she recently testified at the Legislative Interim Committee, the Making Higher Education Attainable Interim Study Committee. And she said that she had included in her presentation an ask to increase funds. So all of you should hopefully have this email, but SNAP outreach funds that would be targeted. No, you can get it.
I don't know, I was on there, I got it.
I think everyone in this work group may have gotten it. It was like 60 people.
It's because it was bounced off of Letitia's earlier email to send out the document.
Right.
So if you're not part of the work group, sorry, Erin. Can you forward it to me?
But she said that if or when we are ready to share our policy concept draft with legislators, she recommends sending it directly to the members of the Higher Education Interim Committee. There are 6 of those members that she listed.
Great.
So thank you, Christina. She's listening.
Yeah, awesome.
One other quick plug, and I've made this, I think, at the very first meeting of this work group, but there's a great tool that we are, Sarah's helping to update in light of the cost of living adjustments. But this is a food stamp calculator that lives on the GapMap website. And so this calculator looks at how much income and expenses someone has, and then will calculate down to the dollar amount what they could be eligible to receive each month in SNAP. Of course, it's not perfectly accurate in the sense that it's only as accurate as the inputs that are given. So if someone's mistaken about what counts as a valid expense, then it wouldn't be accurate. But if all the inputs are accurate, then it is precise. And so this lives at www.gapmap.org/calculator. I think it's really helpful, especially if someone's benefits are being threatened with a reduction or a termination. This gives them the opportunity to kind of double check that math and to see if there might be more that they're entitled to receive. And so feel free to spread the word to anyone who might be interested in that. Great. Well, thank you all so much. And if the folks who are co-chairing our project team have a second to meet with Erin to talk about some scheduling stuff, this would be a great time. But otherwise, thank you all for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.